في السنوات من 1964 إلى 1968 كانا يلتقيان عدة مرات في الأسبوع، وكان القارئ الصغير يتعلم ليس فقط من واحد من أجمل كتاب الأرض قاطبة، بل من أجمل قرائها كذلك. إن القراءة لألبرتو مانغويل هي قراءة عن القراءة، وهي واحدة من تلك الأشياء القليلة التي تأخذنا إلى غبطة مضاعفة، لأنها تشبه الوقوع في حب الحب ذاته. قراءة القراءة، فهم الفهم، الدخول عميقاً في قوقعة تملأ أذنيك بصوت البحر، حيث المعاني تلوح وتفلت وأنت في بحث أبدي عن كلمات من شأنها أن تجعل ساقيك أكثر صلابة في وقوفك المأساوي على أرض الواقع. يكتب مانغويل عن القراءة مدافعاً عن حقنا كقراء في أن نجيء مختلفين، ومثلما أنه لا يمكن لقارئين أن يقلبا صفحات الكتاب نفسه في المكتبة ذاتها، وكما أنك لا تستطيع عبور النهر ذاته مرتين، فإن لكل منا تجربته الفريدة مع الكتب. وبهذا المعنى تصبح رحلتنا القرائية هي سيرتنا الذاتية في أكثر صورها جلاءً. يقول: إن كل مكتبة هي بمثابة سيرة ذاتية لصاحبها. ولد في 1984 في بوينس آيرس، انتقل إلى كندا في 1982. ولد في 1948 في بوينس آيرس، انتقل إلى كندا في 1982 وحاز على جنسيتها. ألف العديد من الكتب مثل تاريخ القراءة، فن القراءة، المكتبة في الليل، الفضول، ومدينة الكلمات، وأخرى كثيرة. تشبه قراءته دائماً أن تتورط بالدخول إلى غابة، ولكنك بدلاً من أن تضيع تماماً ترى أحجاراً صغيرة قد تركت لك على طول الطريق لكي تمتلك دائماً حق العودة إلى الواقع بالعدة اللازمة لمواجهته. يذكرنا مانغويل بما هو جوهري في القراءة، أنها ارتحال في المعنى، وأنها من أجل الحياة، فيما يشبه العودة الأبدية إلى تلك المتون الخالدة التي شكلت ذاكرتنا الجمعية. بينوكيو، الجبان الذي يخشى المكائد، الشجاع بما يكفي لإنقاذ المحاصرين في بطن الحوت. السندباد الذي يرى العالم وراء الأفق ويرى أنه ينبغي على الحياة أن تكون مليئة بالمخاطر. الحكيمة أليس، متصدية لأنظمة صناعة الحماقة في بلاد العجائب. شهرزاد التي تعرف أنه يمكن لقصة مروية بشكل جيد أن تنقذ حياتك. ودانتي الذي زار العالم الغيبي مدفوعاً بفضوله. هؤلاء أصدقاءه يأخذهم معه من كتاب إلى آخر، ومن تجربة حياتية إلى أخرى. نقرأ مانغويل لكي نكتشف بأن القراءة في حقيقتها هي الفعل الأكثر انسجاماً مع جوهر الإنسان، لأن، وأقتبس منه، جميع الكائنات البشرية بطبيعتها ترغب بالمعرفة، ومثلما يصدر الدفء عن النار وكما تميل الأوزان الثقيلة إلى السقوط، كذلك فإن البشر ينزعون إلى الفهم وفي النتيجة إلى المعرفة. لقد تعلمت شخصياً من مانغويل أموراً كثيرة، مثل أن أنصت عميقاً إلى الأسطر وإلى الأصوات التي تحدث في داخلي. تعلمت منك يا سيدي أن أحكم على الكتب من خلال أجمل صفحاتها، وأن أعود إلى طفولتي أمام الكلمات، أن أمتلك حقي كاملاً في الابتهاج بالجمال، وأن أقوم بدوري في إنقاذ ذاكرة الأدب من الانقراض من خلال التوصية المحبة التي يمنحها قارئ إلى آخر، بتعبير هنري ميلر. تعلمت منك يا سيدي أن الأدب صامت بلا قراء، وأن علينا أن نتسلح بالكتب لإنقاذ العالم من العبث، وأن من واجبنا أن نصفق أمام السحر عندما تقفز الأرانب البيضاء من القبعات وتأخذنا إلى بلاد العجائب. ومثلما يؤمن الأطفال بالجنيات، أؤمن بأن القراءة هي من أجل الحياة. السيد ألبرتو مانغويل، شكراً على كل شيء، وأهلاً بك في الكويت.
Many thanks.
You're welcome.
Good evening.
1 second. Okay.
That one. First of all, I want to apologize for not speaking Arabic. I speak a much younger language, so you will have to listen to me through the beautiful translation that the Bothania has commissioned of my words. I'm sure they will be better in translation. I'm very honored to be here. This is my first time in Kuwait. I hope it won't be my last. The hospitality and friendship of the people of Kuwait is astonishing. And so thank you. The title of my talk is Reading in Order to Live. The quote comes from a letter that Gustave Flaubert wrote to Mademoiselle de Chantepie, who was a friend of his. And in that letter he says, read in order to live. Tourist guides offer excursions along the arduous path of Ulysses and Don Quixote. Crumbling buildings are said to house Desdemona's bedchamber in Venice and Shahrazad's rooms in Baghdad. A Colombian village assures us that it's the real Macondo of Aureliano Buendía, and the island of Juan Fernandez boasts of having welcomed centuries ago that singular imperialist Robinson Crusoe. For many years now, the British Postal Service has busied itself with correspondence addressed to Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Esquire, at 221B Baker Street, while Charles Dickens received an endless stream of angry letters blaming him for the death of little Nell in the old curiosity shop. Biology tells us that we descend from creatures of flesh and blood, but intimately we know that we are the sons and daughters of ghosts of ink and paper. Ages ago, the poet Luis de Góngora defined them with these words. In his playhouse built on lofty drapes, sleep the author of dramatic scenes, dresses up phantoms of becoming shapes. Readers around the world express veneration for the likes of Shakespeare and Cervantes, but these beings, immortalized in hopeful and solemn portraits, are less tangible than their immortal creations. Lear and Lady Macbeth, Don Quixote and his Dulcinea are real presences, even for many of those who have never read their books. We are acquainted with the entangled passions of Queen Dido and of Don Juan, far more than with the intimate lives of Virgil and Molière, except in the aspects revealed in the novels of Hermann Broch and Mikhail Bulgakov. Most readers have always known that the dreams of fiction give birth to the world we call real. Thanks to a quirky school teacher in high school, we read extracts of Edmund Husserl on phenomenology, which in our idealistic adolescence we found fascinating. While most of the adult world seemed to insist that only tangible things were worth caring for, Husserl, to our delight, argued that we can forge a bond, even a deep bond, with things that are deemed inexistent. Mermaids and unicorns, as far as we know, have no proven tangible existence, even though medieval Chinese bestiaries declare that the reason unicorns are not often seen is because of their extreme shyness. And yet, Husserl argued, the human mind can be intentionally directed towards those imaginary beings and create between us and them what he unpoetically calls a normal dyadic relationship. I have established such intimate relationships with hundreds of such creatures. But not every literary character is the chosen companion of every reader. Only those we love best follow us throughout the years. As far as I'm concerned, I don't feel as mine the doubtlessly heart-wrenching troubles of Renzo and Lucia, of Mathilde de la Mole and Julian Sorel. I'm closer to the vengeful wrath of the Count of Monte Cristo and to the reasoned melancholy of Monsieur Teste. My more intimate comrades are others. The Man Who Was Thursday, by Chesterton, mysteriously helps me cope with the absurdities of everyday life. Priam teaches me to weep for the death of younger friends, and Achilles for that of my beloved elders. Little Red Riding Hood and Dante the Pilgrim guide me through the dark forests of the road of life. Sancho's friend, the exiled Ricote, allows me to understand something of the infamous notion of prejudice. And there are so many more. Perhaps one of the main attractions of imaginary beings is their multiple and changing identities. Rooted in their own histories, fictional characters cannot be caged between the covers of their books, however brief or vast that space might be. Hamlet is born already grown into adulthood under the blind arcades of Elsinore and dies still young among a pile of corpses in one of the castle's feasting halls. But generations of readers have rescued from darkness both his Freudian childhood and his posthumous political career, for instance, in the Third Reich, where he became the most performed character on stage. Chom Thumb has increased in size. Helen has become a wizened hag. Rastignac works for the International Monetary Fund. Kim has been recruited by the British Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Pinocchio is languishing in the concentration camp for children in Texas. The Princess of Clèves has been forced to seek employment on Skid Row. Unlike their readers, who grow old, like me, and never become young again, fictional characters are at the same time those whom they were when we read them for the first time, and those whom they have become in our successive readings. Every fictional character is like Proteus, the sea god, to whom Poseidon granted the power of transforming himself into any of the shapes in the universe. I know who I am, Don Quixote says in one of his earliest adventures, after a neighboring farmer tries to convince him that he is not one of the imaginary persons in the knight's beloved novels of chivalry. And I know that I can be not only those I mentioned, but all the 12 peers of France, and even the 9 worthies, because my achievements will excel not only each one singly, but even the deeds of all of them together. Don Quixote emphatically assumes the myriad identities of the characters in his books. More etymologies, like sympathy, empathy, derives from the Greek root pathos, meaning to endure or to undergo. The word empates, with a sense of much affected by, appears seldom in the Greek corpus. Aristotle employs the term only once in his 6th book of his treatise on dreams, to refer to the intense fear experienced by a coward who dreams that his enemies are approaching. Well, in English, the word empathy is a fairly recent invention. It was coined in 1909 by a psychologist at Cornell University, Edward Bradford Titchener, who suggested the term as a translation of the German Einfühlung. According to Titchener, this emotional impulse to feel into something or someone is a strategy that we employ to find in external examples solutions for our mental conflicts. Empathy with others, Titchener suggests, heals the self. Husserl would say that those others need not to be of flesh and blood. My experience has been Husserlian. One can build one's own biography in many different ways, through the places one has lived in, through the dreams one has had and still remembers, through remarkable encounters like this one, through mere chronological accounting. I have always thought of my life as the turning of the pages of many books. My readings, the ones that form my imaginary cartography, define almost every one of my intimate experiences. And I can trace back to a certain paragraph or line most everything I think I know about essential things. Those pages, read far away and long ago, include the experiences of today. In our own daily anguished times, the forced migrations, the still hopeful refugees, the shipwrecked asylum seekers washed up on the European coast are all reflected in the figure of Ulysses trying to find his home. In a study conducted in 1992 by a researcher at the University of Guadalajara in Mexico, one of the migrant workers interviewed described his experience of trying to reach the United States. He said, "The North is like the sea. When one travels as an illegal, one is dragged like the tail of an animal, like trash. I imagined how the sea washes trash onto the shore, and I told myself, maybe it's just like I'm in the ocean, being tossed out again and again." This is Ulysses' experience after leaving Calypso in a renewed attempt to reach Ithaca, as told by Homer. "Now it seems that I shall come to a most pitiable end." As he spoke, a sea broke over him with such terrific fury that the raft reeled again and he was carried overboard a long way off. He let go of the helm, and the force of the hurricane was so great that it broke the mast halfway up, and both sail and yard went over into the sea. For a long time, Ulysses was underwater, and it was all he could do to rise to the surface again, for the clothes Calypso had given him weighed him down. But at last he got his head above water and spat out the bitter brine that was running down his face in streams. In spite of all this, however, he did not lose sight of his raft, but swam as fast as he could towards it, got hold of it, and climbed on board again so as to escape drowning. The sea took the raft and tossed it about as autumn winds whirl thistledown round and round upon a road. Ulysses speaks to us in the voice of a hopeful migrant worker of today. The experience of the world, love, death, friendship, loss, gratitude, bewilderment, anguish, and fear, all these, and my own changing identity, I've learned from the imaginary characters that I've met throughout my readings, much more than through my shadowy face in the mirror or my reflection in the eyes of others. Because my father was a diplomat, my childhood was largely spent traveling from place to place. The bedrooms in which I slept, the words spoken outside the door, the landscapes around me all changed. Only my books remained the same. And I remember the intense relief I felt when, tucked once again in an unfamiliar bed, I opened my books, and there, on the expected page, was the same old story and the same old illustration. Home was a place in my books, both in the physical object I held in my hands and in the printed words. When Mole in The Wind in the Willows returns to his little house from the big outside world and lets his eyes wander around the old room and sees how plain and simple it all is and understands how much it means to him, I remember feeling something like pangs of envy, knowing that he had a place to come back to, a place which was all his own, these things which were so glad to see him again and could always be counted upon for the same simple welcome. When I felt truly in love for the first time and tried to understand my mixed emotions of bewilderment, contentment, and triumph, and fumbled for words to express my feelings. The loves of Laila and Manjun, discovered in a German children's version, gave me the words I needed to name the strange experience. I later confirmed them in the words of Juliet to her Romeo, warning me against artificial coyness. If thou thinkst I am too quickly worn, I'll frown and be perverse and say thee nay. So wilt woo, but else not for the world. Sadegh Hedayat says in The Blind Owl that throughout our lives the finger of death points at us. Through The Blind Owl and other stories, I feel now I'll have at least a pocket guide of that finger-pointing presence once I reach it. To begin with, I will know it's a verb, not a noun. When the narrator in André Malraux's La Voix Royale mentions death to his agonizing friend, the man reacts with indignant anger. There is no death. There's only me who is dying. And Tolstoy's Ivan Ilyich tells me what that feeling of coming to an end might be like. He says, what had happened to him was like the sensation one sometimes experiences in a railway carriage when one thinks one is going backwards while one is really going forwards and suddenly becomes aware of the real direction. I believe I know exactly what he means. However, if I had a choice of death, I choose for my last chapter that of the writer Bergotte in Proust's vast saga. All through that night of morning, in the lighted windows, his books, arranged 3 by 3, kept vigil like angels with outspread wings, and seemed, for him who was no more, the symbol of his resurrection. Not only in love and death do my imaginary friends assist and counsel me. In my writing too, they occasionally provide all manner of help. What has become a cornerstone of faith for me, truer than true and more so as time goes by, are the words the abbot says to the painter of illuminations in the medieval scriptorium in Kipling's story, The Eye of Allah. But for the pain of the soul, there is outside God's grace but one drug, and that is man's craft, learning, or other helpful motion of his own mind. My imaginary friends assist me to achieve such helpful motions. In the distant childhood of my generation, our playmates were Pippi Longstocking and Pinocchio, Sandokan the pirate, and Mandrake the magician. Those of today's children are presumably Harry Potter and Maurice Sendak Wild Things. All these creatures are so unconditionally faithful that they are not troubled by our weaknesses and failures. And I will end with this. Now that my bones barely allow me to reach the lowest shelves, Sandokan keeps calling me to arms, and Mandrake compels me to seek vengeance against fools, while Pippi, with great patience, tells me again not to give a hoot about conventions and follow my own nose. And Pinocchio keeps on asking me why, in spite of what the blue fairy has told him, it isn't enough to be honest and good in order to be happy. And I, as in the days far away and long ago, cannot find the right answer. Thank you. Thank you. Shall we go there?
Yes, please.
You want me?
First of all, I'd like to welcome you again in Kuwait. You inspired many writers and many readers in the Arab region, and for that, thank you very much for everything that you do. I have some questions, and after that, I would love to hear also from the audience. My first question, in many books of yours and in many speeches also, you mention something called the unfinished book, the book of sand, or the book of everything, the book that is continuously written and will never end. Why do people desire such a fantasy? How do you imagine it?
Well, first of all, again, I will say thank you for the hospitality. It's a great privilege to be here. I will quote Borges not for the first and not for the last time. Borges, in an essay he wrote in the 30s on the translations of Homer, says that there is no such thing as a definitive text. He says that the idea of a definitive text belongs only to religion or fatigue. The writer gets so tired, he says, okay, publish it, I'm not correcting it anymore. But that everything can be considered a draft, and that there is no hierarchy between the first draft and the last draft. He says also that a translation is another draft. Yeah. And in that sense, the drafts that a writer produces can be understood as a translation into the same language. It's a brilliant idea. Yeah. But we look for the finished book, and it's never possible because we are working with an instrument that is weak, language. Yes. And language never manages to grasp the full content of our experience. We have to resign ourselves to literature, which is a good consolation.
Yeah. Okay. In your book, The City of Words, you wrote a beautiful chapter about stories and how they provide an opportunity for growth and for wisdom, and moving on memories to future generations and shaping our identity. But is there a bad type of stories? Stories that reduce reality to stereotypes, stories that justify judgment? Do you believe that there is a bad story?
I don't believe that there is a bad story.
You
I
don't?
believe that there are bad writers.
Okay.
A good writer can take any story and make it extraordinary. Mm-hmm. We are storytelling animals. Our survival in the world depends on the stories we tell. And from the beginning of consciousness, we have begun to develop a way of relating our experience of reality in the form of stories. Look, every religion has a sacred text, but it is not the dogma that convinces somebody to become a believer. It's the stories that the religion tells.
Wow.
It's the allegories, it's the legends, it's the stories.
Yeah.
And it's these stories that allow us a communal feel of being human.
Mm-hmm.
The great anthologist, but also poet, Abu Tammam said that blood relationships may not exist, for instance, among the Arab people,
Yes.
but that literature is our adopted father.
Oh my God.
That's such a wonderful idea, and I believe in that strongly.
Okay, so no bad stories, but bad writers. Okay. In your book, Curiosity, you criticized the educational system. You said that it doesn't recognize any knowledge that exists out of the field of materialistic efficiency or profit. And instead of creating forums for wondering and questioning, all we care about is to prepare the fresh labor force to the market. I'm translating you from the Arabic, so I'm sure there is a vacuum. As individuals who were merely created by that educational system, what do you think we should do to break up from that system of thought?
Change society.
How?
Well, these problems are not isolated problems. We live everywhere around the world in consumer societies. And a consumer society needs to produce consumers. And who is the best consumer? The idiot.
Yes.
The person who doesn't reflect, doesn't read, and simply believes in advertising that says that a pair of jeans that costs $500 makes you beautiful and intelligent. The system of education should be aimed to allowing the child to let his or her imagination run free. And instead, we have constructed training grounds for the office, for the factory. We manufacture slaves in our education systems around the world, because we need to produce consumers, and we are like those primitive people who fed their children to the god of fire. We are prepared to sacrifice our children for the sake of the profit we want to make in society. And unless those values change, nothing will change.
Which is interesting because you said produce consumers, which means the consumer is also a good in the system.
Of course,
it's a cycle, and
that's a phenomenon called objectification,
yes,
where you turn people and you turn values into consumer products. Mm-hmm. It is a vicious circle, but we do this with everything. Look. In the 19th century, even in the 19th century, as recent as that, the idea of selling water and selling air would be inconceivable. Now that's what we're doing.
Yes.
All these bottles are completely useless. Mm-hmm. We have water. The earth gives us water. And even in the desert, people survived without those plastic bottles. But the industry creates them, and so we have to use them, and we are convinced that they are necessary. They are not.
Yeah, everything is turned into a good. Okay, next question. Each period of your life is usually associated with a book. It's like a companion book that dominates your thoughts and attracts you most. Like Alice in Wonderland, Don Quixote, Arabian Nights, and the Divine Comedy. So what's your companion book now?
Well, lately I have been reading 2 books, and don't laugh, because they go very well together. One is Plato's Republic, because I like Plato much more than Aristotle, because he is a man who is able to not come to a conclusion. There are dialogues that are open and people discuss openly, and Socrates realizes at the end of a dialogue that, well, no, this leads nowhere, and so we will abandon the conversation. And you have read that whole dialogue. And in the Republic, the discussion about systems of government and the criticism that he makes of democracy is absolutely valid. Look, of course, of all the bad systems that we have, perhaps an ideal democracy is the best. But still, Socrates says, if you want to buy a horse, you ask the opinion of somebody who knows about horses.
Yes.
And if you ask 50 people who don't know about horses,
then you will buy the wrong horse.
You will get the wrong answer.
Yeah.
So I love the Republic, and I read it now constantly.
Even though he's not very friendly with poets.
Well, he's been misunderstood in that sense. What he is saying is that we shouldn't confuse the imagination with the real thing.
Yeah.
But he takes it further. But we can talk about that another time.
Okay.
The book that I'm reading with the Republic is Jane Eyre. I read Jane Eyre when I was an adolescent, and I hadn't gone back to it since. And I read it now, and it's astonishing. It is one of the greatest novels ever written, and it produces the character of Jane Eyre as an independent woman, a woman who can also build her identity not by refusing reality, not by not facing reality, but on the contrary, she faces reality on her own terms.
Yes.
And so she meets injustice, she endures all sorts of suffering, but always with her conscious mind and knowing what she's doing. And so finally, when in the end you're supposed to have a romantic ending and she goes back to Rochester, who is now blind and abandoned, she goes back on her own terms, and the first thing she tells him is, I'm an independent woman. Now that's reading for today.
Yes, it is. Yes, thank you for sharing that. One more question, and then I'll hear from the audience. When it comes to reading, you always leave some room for coincidences.
For what?
A coincidence to happen.
Of course.
Yes, which means you get to read a random book and see where it takes you. Some readers think that to be able to grow or mature as a reader, you need a program or a plan. What do you think of that?
I will quote Borges again.
Okay.
Borges said that reading cannot be obligatory because happiness cannot be obligatory.
I totally agree. Yeah.
To Borges.
And to you. So anyone has a question? Okay. 1 second.
Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for being here. You're not only a good writer, a great writer and great reader, you're a great speaker too. I was mesmerized with your speech.
Well, thank you.
My question is, if I'm reading a book that I don't like, do I force myself to finish it or just throw it away and go to the next book?
The big difference between a book and a person is that if you speak to a person that you don't like, you have to be well-mannered and you can't simply walk away. With a book you can. And I give a book 2-3 pages. If after 2-3 pages we are not friends, it's not worth it. The libraries are very big. It doesn't mean that there are bad books, but not every book is for every reader. Yes. You know, every person is not for every other person. In life, we meet a small group of friends among the millions of people in the world. We meet one partner for life. Why should it be different with books? And so there are books that I think are very well written, but they are not written for me.
That's a very liberating thought. Any more questions? There is one there.
Muchas gracias. Welcome to Kuwait. We are very happy because you are here. I have two questions, and I will ask in Arabic, and hope Buthina will help me.
Okay, وإذا ما عرفت بخفي ترجمة فورية.
إن شاء الله. كتبت تاريخ القراءة وهو كتاب عظيم وضخم.
You wrote a history of reading, which is a great and a huge book.
موسوعة في علم القراءة إن صح التعبير.
It's an encyclopedia in the science of reading.
ما هو السبب الذي دعاك إلى أن تستلم مواضيع من تاريخ القراءة وتطرحها في فن القراءة وفي الفضول وفي المكتبة في الليل?
Okay, so why did you drag the same subject from the history of reading and then you discuss the same subject in the art of reading, curiosity, الثالث,
المكتبة في الليل,
and the library at night?
I know I repeat myself and I'm obsessive with the subject of reading, but I began writing about reading because I had a very basic question. We readers know that we are the ones who decide whether a book will survive or not. We are the ones who decide even what a book is. The writer can say, I've written this great philosophical classic, and we says, no, that's just an adventure story, and that is what it becomes. Why is it then, if we have this great power, that the histories of literature are written following the writers and not the readers? Because those writers who appear in the history of literature are the ones that we chose. So why are we not recognized? And so I wrote a history of reading to look at that. Then I wrote a book called Reading Pictures because I was interested in how we read images and how the narrative impulse that we have to assemble reality and what the impressions of reality that we receive in a narrative context, does it apply to images? So I wrote that book. Then I wrote a reader's diary because I wanted to show how mistaken is the idea that reading withdraws us from reality. Reading plunges our faces into reality. And I wanted to show in that book the relationship between a book that I read every month and what happens in my private life and what happens in the world. So I wrote that book for that reason. And I wrote The Library at Night because I thought I had found paradise. I found a house in France in which I lived for 15 years, which had a space big enough to lodge my, at the time, 25, then 30, then 35, then 40,000 books. And I thought I had found paradise. Now, I had forgotten what literature has taught me, that the definition of paradise is the place that you lose. And so I had to leave that place, sell the house, and my books are in boxes in a storage space in Canada, waiting for the day of their resurrection.
Yeah. I want to ask you something. I'm going to mention a name, and you tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. So it's like a game. الطيب صالح. الطيب صالح.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
الطيب صالح. The Sudanese.
Yes.
Yes.
Poetry.
Okay. نجيب محفوظ.
Dickens.
محمود درويش.
The greatest poet of the 20th century.
Oh my God. Gabriel
He was
Garcia.
an admirer
Yes,
of Borges.
Yes.
I had the good fortune of meeting him, and we had long discussions of Borges. He was a great reader of Borges.
Yes.
And I translated some of his poems via the French into Spanish.
From French to Spanish.
Yeah.
Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
A fabulist.
Yukio Mishima.
The philosophy of survival from someone who believed in suicide.
Wow. Don Quixote.
That it is important to fight injustice even if you don't win.
Even if you're fighting an illusion.
Don Quixote knows that there is injustice in the world, and he takes the ethics of the novels of chivalry, which are adventures, of course, as if you were taking the ethics of Superman or Batman to fight in the world. But the important thing is that he confronts injustice.
Yes.
And when he is told, but this are you are imagining, he says, but the injustice is real.
Yeah. Arabian Nights.
Arabian Nights hold all the stories that we can make up. And every story that we read in literature is in some way a variation of something that's already in the Arabian Nights.
So it's like the book of everything?
It is the book of everything.
Yeah.
Yes. There are a few books that have been written in the history of the world that contain everything, and the Arabian Nights is one of them.
Crime and Punishment.
You put me in a difficult place.
Why?
Because this is a book that I think is important, but it is not my book.
Okay. Kafka.
Kafka is the mirror of our time. Kafka points out the absurdity of our obligation to live.
Yes.
There is an anecdote, two anecdotes of Kafka. One is, in spite of everything, his optimism. When a nephew of his, a little boy, fell down in the street and his friends were going to laugh at him, Kafka said, "How well you have fallen and how well you have stood up." Wonderful, huh?
Yes.
And the other anecdote is his pessimism. He was discussing with Max Brod some question, and Max Brod got so impatient, he said, "Well, if you say that, there is no hope." And Kafka stopped and said with a big smile, "But of course there's hope, but not for us."
Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde.
Who?
Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde.
This is one of the basic myths that Stevenson created it, but it is much older. It is the notion that we are not one but two.
Yes.
It is the notion that we have everything dark and everything light in each one of us. Carl Gustav Jung has the idea of the shadow, and your shadow is what your psyche hides from your presence in the world. So if you in the world are a saint, your shadow will
Must
be
very
demonic.
dark, yes.
And if you are demonic, your shadow will
be a
be a
saint.
kind and generous shadow.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Okay. Alberto Mangel.
An old, tired man on reading his last chapter.
No.
Oh,
Not
yes.
accepted.
The Bible prescribes us 70 years, 70, and it says that after that age, it will be suffering and misery. So I am about to be 71 years old, and I'm just going to cross that limit.
We all pray that God gives you a long life. Anyone has
If God gives me at the same time
and a happy life with good health.
and
Yes.
my head,
Yes.
so be it, inshallah.
Inshallah.
But if not, let's get to the last sentence.
No, hopefully no. Anyone has a
الأخير-
question?
السؤال الأخير بس.
Okay.
Yes.
قصير.
Yes.
تعرف الكثير عن العرب والمسلمين وعن موروثنا الأدبي.
You know a lot about the Arabic heritage and the Islamic heritage.
ما هي مصادرك في
Where did you
التعرف
get
على
this
الأدب
knowledge
العربي؟
from?
I don't know a lot about anything, but I am very interested in many things. One of the regrets of my life is that I haven't learned Arabic. I still hope to try. I tried it once some years ago, but I wasn't constant enough. But I find it so interesting to approach a culture for which poetry and philosophy is at the essence. And stories are there, but they are so obvious in everyday life that they don't become a literary genre until much later. I find that extraordinary because it shows such a depth of thought. We were talking about education.
Yes.
And if you educate through philosophy and poetry, you teach the child to reason, to open the child's imagination. And that is what fascinates me in Islamic culture.
Any more questions? Okay. Okay.
Okay. First of all, thank you for coming to Kuwait, and thank you, Takween, for giving us this a huge opportunity.
My pleasure.
I have one question, and for me, it's like a nightmare. Whenever I read a book, like sometimes they put kind of reference, or they mention the sources of the book, so I get so attached with that paragraph, so I go and buy a lot of books, or these sources in the all the. So at the end, I end up buying like 10 books because only one book. How can you, like if you read a book, how can you hold these kind of thoughts and continue finishing the reading of the book to the end? Then you can go and read another book.
Do you finish reading any book?
The question then is, how can
you stop yourself from searching for more books related to the subject and resources? You don't,
I'm constantly
right?
looking for more books. Look, when I travel with an almost empty suitcase because I know that it will be filled when I go back with books that I find or are given to me. I think readers are divided between those for whom the text is enough, and Borges was one of those. He gave the books in his house to friends. He had a library of maybe 600, 700 books. He didn't care for the physical object. I am the contrary. I am a fetishist. I like the presence of the books. And I like to know that they are there, even if I know I won't read the 40,000 books. In my library, I had books that I knew were bad, books that I knew I would never read, but just in case one day I needed them. And I'll tell you an anecdote. Once a publisher sent me 2 big volumes on the history of agriculture in Nigeria from 1892 to 1933. And my partner said, well, you're not going to keep this when you read. He said, you never know. The week after, I was asked to review a novel by a Nigerian writer set in the country, and I could start the review with great authority saying, in 1926, so you never know.
Very interesting. Let's hear another question.
Yes.
Okay.
Here. Good evening.
Okay, hi.
Welcome to Kuwait. Ustad Buthayna.
Oh, okay.
Here.
Okay. Hi. Sorry.
It's very dark. Yes.
Good evening. I'm
Yes.
I'm really happy to meet you, and thank you, Buthayna, for this
Thank you.
time. I have to say my question in English, in Arabic, because I'm not sure of my English.
No problem.
قدح في بالي سؤال أثناء حديثه عن العمر.
أنا ما أقدر أترجم قدح في بالي.
Okay. This question.
ما عليه.
Okay, I will say it in English.
Okay, قولي السؤال.
Okay, I'll say it in English.
لا عادي قولي بالعربي والله أترجم.
Go ahead.
No, really, I make this question when you spoke about the age. You said, I think it's the end is 70. So, have you ever write about the life after the death? Because I don't think whole this life is just end, stop. Did you imagine what will happen later?
Do you believe in life after death?
No.
To write what will happen after all this life. Is it this not wise to just end it?
Well, I wouldn't end it myself. It will be ended for me. But I hope that when my life comes to the end, at least my body will serve to feed the roses. I don't believe in life after death.
But would you like to believe that?
Well, if I would, I would. If I like to believe it, I would believe in it. But I don't. I am very satisfied with the life that was given to me. I think I've been immensely lucky in the experiences I have had and the people I met and the friends that I have made, and with my children and my grandchildren. So why would I want more? If I read a book that I love passionately, I know it will come to an end. I don't want an endless book. I think that the experience of reading a book that never ends would be a nightmare. What makes my life so marvelous for me is that I know it will come to an end.
Yeah. Do we have a question? Okay.
Thank you. I just would like to ask, I'm very happy that you mentioned about the lousy educational system that we have. It really left us almost reading nothing. I am personally someone who finished my high school diploma after 12 years of studying, reading really as little as you could imagine, and then I continued my studies until finishing my PhD. And if you ask me how many books have you read in the last 7 years of studying or 12 years, it's really, really minimal. And although I have a library, I have a fabulous books to read, and again, I just still can't find, initiate the reading habits again and again. So I keep a book in my purse all the time. I keep a book with me in a coffee shop, in my bed. But again, my other enemy, other than the educational system, is the iPhone. So again, how do I start this habit of reading and initiating the reading and finishing the book? So that's the things I have, that's the issue that I have a struggle with.
How do you make it a part of your lifestyle?
How do you make it part of your life? Well, the first...
Studying and being educated, and then you are not a reader.
If you want to read, you are a reader. It doesn't matter how much you read. But if you want to read more, throw your phone away.
That was short. We have a question.
في سؤال عندي.
وين ما أشوف. أوكي.
هني.
هلا.
مساء الخير ومرحبا فيك بيننا بالكويت.
She says welcome to Kuwait.
طبعا راح أتكلم باللغة العربية لأنها لغتي وأعتز فيها جدا.
She's proud of being an Arabic and she's going to ask you in Arabic.
أستاذ تطرقت بشكل سريع لكلمة السعادة. فمن خلال قراءتك للعديد من الكتب وأقدر أقول لعيشك العديد من الحيوات يعني مثل ما نقول، هل توصلت إلى تعريف دقيق للسعادة التي طبعا ينشدها أكيد البشر كلهم؟ وشكرا لك.
You mentioned the word happiness. You read many books and maybe you lived many lives through those books. Did you reach a definition for happiness after all that experience? How do you define it?
How do you define happiness? I would define I would define happiness as the moment that you know you're happy. That is to say, I don't want to be facetious, but you remain conscious of the great suffering in the world.
Yes.
You remain conscious of the great injustice that's happening in the world. But yet, there is something in the world itself that is filled with generosity and possibilities that are offered to you. So, in spite of the darkness, there are always moments of light. And you have two ways of looking at the sky. You can see it as darkness with points of light, or points of light that are made to shine because of the darkness. Yes. And those moments when I realize that are moments of happiness.
Yeah. Very nice. There is a question here and here. Whoever has the mic. Okay.
Thanks for your poetic discourse. My question is, you mentioned Jane Eyre as a companion with you. Why not Heights of Weathering? Height of Weathering, why? Because there is a man, his name is Heathcliff, and in Jane Eyre there is a woman. Maybe this is the reason?
Repeat the question.
Can you
because
please repeat the question?
You repeat. I'm a
Wuthering
bit deaf.
Heights.
قولي له معلش ترجمي انت.
لا انت قلت you mentioned Jane Eyre, why not Wuthering
أشرت
Heights?
جين إير، ليش ما أشرتش للرواية الثانية اللي اسمها مرتفعات ويذرينج؟ هل السبب هناك بطل اسمه هيثكليف وهنا بطل امرأة اسمها جين؟
Why did you mention Jane Eyre instead of Wuthering Heights? Is it because there is a Heathcliff here and here there is a Jane?
Because I like Jane Eyre much more, and I think it's a better book and it's much deeper. Wuthering Heights is a good novel, but I think it bends too much towards the conventional idea of romantic love that triumphs in the end. And in Jane Eyre, nothing is conventional, that every time you move towards a conventional situation, Jane Eyre, because of her character, faces it in an unexpected way, and in a way that is so liberating for the reader. That's why I prefer it.
How do you feel about the character of the wife, the mad one who is locked in the basement?
There is a novel by Jane Reese,
Yes.
the English writer, called White Sargasso Sea,
Yes,
that tries to create a biography of the mad wife. But in Jane Eyre, this is just a moment, a tragic moment in Rochester's life. He is married to this woman. He doesn't know that she is mentally ill, and he doesn't abandon her, but she is dangerous even to herself.
Yeah.
So I don't think Rochester is to blame for anything except for a trick of fate.
Yeah.
And even then, Jane Eyre is capable of confronting that.
Yes. Okay, yes. تفضل.
There is
Thank
a
you.
lady there who has been wanting to ask a question, but
Okay.
yes, maybe if you... Yes, please.
عادي شباب ناخذ السؤال من الأستاذة ليلاس. أي بس دقيقة المايك. إن شاء الله.
السؤال الأول هقول شوي عشان ترجمي. بالنسبة لعنا فكرة إحنا عن القراءة في الغرب مقارنة بالقراءة في الوطن العربي، إنه معدلات القراءة ونوعية القراءة في الغرب أفضل كتير من الموجود.
We have this perception or idea that reading in the West comes with higher rates than reading in the Arab world.
هل هاي الفكرة فعلا حقيقية؟ وهل نوعية الكتب اللي بيقبل عليها القارئ الغربي هل هي فعلا كتب نوعية ولا البيست سيلرز؟
Is it true? What about the quality of books read by Western readers? Are they better than what we read here?
هي فعلا عفوا بس مش أفضل، إنه هي فعلا هي قراءة نوعية ولا كتب اللي بتنقرا بالأندر جراوند وبالبساط وإيش البيست سيلرز؟
Are they books of quality or the books that usually read in undergrounds and buses, just entertainment?
I go back to what I was saying about the consumer society. So the consumer society has produced all these gadgets, the iPhones and the e-books and so on. So what you see on the subway in New York, for instance, is people with those gadgets and not even reading, playing those games and those things. I think that what I have experienced traveling throughout the world is that in places of great conflict, in places that are suffering terribly, I was in Colombia during the very hard years of the drug dealers and the kidnappings. I was in Yemen. I was in Iraq when Saddam Hussein was there, and in those places, I knew people from Haiti after the earthquake. In those places, reading becomes vitally essential. But vitally essential, I remember the emotion I felt in Colombia where people had to take a different route to take their children to school because if not they would be kidnapped if the kidnappers knew that you took one certain road. And when you got together for a meal, there was always somebody who stood up and recited a poem, somebody who read a story. Literature became, but truly, not as a metaphor, a vital activity. And so in the West, I think in places like the United States, they are so accustomed to the idea that they are protected, that war is something that happens over there, that they are not to blame for anything. And it produces a kind of stupidity that doesn't allow them to seek literature. And there's a problem attached to that, but this is another question. In the Anglo-Saxon world, the combination of the work of editors who work on the manuscripts of a writer, adapting the text to the requirements of the publishing company, and the writing schools that produce formulas for the writers to write, have created one of the most impoverished literatures in the world. Right today, this is my personal opinion, that the real literature, the literature that will stay, the literature that will change lives, is written in every language except English, except the English that comes from India and the Caribbean, because the rest is so self-centered. Every other novel written in America today is about a dysfunctional family in Brooklyn. Well, I'm not interested in this. This is not a family like in the Greek tragedies that transcends generations or generations. It's concentrated in the little problem of a person in Brooklyn, and it doesn't expand, and it's written according to the formula established by these writing schools. So that is the difference that I feel.
آخر سؤال. لا لحظة معلش أفضل لأن إن شاء الله already الفعالية مدتها ساعة والمركز مددوا لنا ثلث ساعة.
You're ignoring the lady in the second row that has been wanting to ask a question since the beginning.
I know. I'm supposed to end at 8 and it's 8:20 already. So we have room for one more question. You've been waiting.
I'm in no hurry.
I'm not in a hurry too. I would love to stay here forever actually, but it's not my choice. So, okay, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Bethina. And welcome to Mr. Alberto. We're so lucky to have you here in Kuwait. I have a question. What makes a story last for generations, such as Pinocchio and Alice in Wonderland? What makes it stays in our mind?
That's a beautiful question.
It's a question that's impossible to answer. Because, well, Kafka said that a story has to be the axe that breaks the ice in the frozen lake inside us. But what makes a story that and not something else is something that readers decide. What makes me read, for instance, the end of the Iliad when Priam goes to see Achilles begging for the body of his son that Achilles killed. And Achilles is furious against Priam and the Trojans. And when they meet, they no longer are the king of Troy and the conquering Greek hero. They're an old man and a young man. And Achilles sees in Priam the image of his father that he probably won't see again, that is back home, and starts to weep. And Priam sees in Achilles not the murderer of his son, but a young man who is like his son was, and begins to weep. And the two men, the men whose son was murdered and the murderer of the son, meet and embrace and cry together for the suffering of the human species. That is great literature, but what makes it like that, I don't know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
شكرا.
Thank you.
It's been great.